long, long time ago, people spent much time in search of food. When a hunter killed a large animal, there was usually more than enough to eat. So the family ate, and ate heartily. They knew that what they could not eat would soon spoil and go to waste. The hunter's wife must have wished she knew how to keep all this food from spoiling. But there were only a few ways to keep food from going bad in those days. American pioneers, of course, knew how to preserve some foods, and they learned from the Indians how to keep others. Sometimes new ways of keeping foods were found accidentally. The news of this would spread from neighbor to neighbor. For instance, people discovered that foods keep longer in cool places. So they stored food in cellars underground that would stay cool even in the summer. But only recently have we discovered why foods spoil. Now we can buy food weeks or even months before we will actually eat it. Food can be sent across the country and kept in grocery stores and supermarkets for a long time, with no fear of the food spoiling. Today we know that keeping food fit to eat means keeping 3 different kinds of tiny plants out of the food. These tiny plants are called molds, yeast, and bacteria. Remember the words, molds, yeast, and bacteria. First, let's learn about molds by watching some food spoil. A slice of bread, for instance. The slice of bread should be moist. Tiny mold seeds floating in the air will fall on the bread. Then the bread should be placed in a dark, warm place for about 2 days. Do you see the fuzz that has grown on the bread? It is called bread mold. Moldy bread doesn't taste good. Let's look at this bread mold through a magnifying glass. Mold is a tiny plant. That fuzz on the bread is a small garden of mold plants, and the bread itself is the garden plot. The mold seeds were planted when they fell on the bread from the air. Notice that the bread mold has many little branches and roots. We can see that the roots of the mold grow deep into the bread, just as roots of plants grow deep into the soil. Do you see the dark cluster at the top of the mold plant on the left? With a stronger lens, we can see that this round dark cluster is a sac full of mold seeds. We call these seeds spores. Spores are so light that they float in the air, and so they can easily get into our food. If you take a brush and brush away the mold on bread, you will see dust rise. This dust is made up of the thousands of tiny spores that have grown on a single slice of bread. Most molds spoil food, but some molds can be put to work for us. Certain molds give cheese a special flavor, and so some kinds of cheese we have we owe to the different kinds of molds. But when molds grow on the wrong foods, they spoil the taste and may destroy some of the food value. With a microscope, scientists study different kinds of mold and separate those that are useful from those that are not. Different molds have different colors and shapes. There are many kinds of molds, just as there are many varieties of plants and flowers in a garden. Each mold acts on a different kind of food in a different way. It is usually easy to discover food that has become moldy because the mold plants grow on the surface, where we can see them. But some tiny plants that spoil food are almost invisible. This orange juice, for example, is being spoiled by another kind of tiny plant called yeast. See these bubbles coming up through the orange pulp in the bottom of the glass? They tell us that yeast plants are growing in the food. Yeasts are too small to be seen even with an ordinary magnifying glass, but we can see them through a microscope. These bubbles are a gas, carbon dioxide, which yeasts give off when they feed on sugar and water. As the yeasts grow and multiply, they make the juice turn sour. Like molds, some yeasts are very useful. For instance, some yeasts make bread dough rise. Mother deliberately puts a special kind of yeast in the flour she uses to bake bread. As this yeast grows, it too will give off carbon dioxide, and this gas is what makes bread dough rise. Now we can see the air holes in the bread, which have been made by the gas escaping from the yeast. So it is yeasts which make bread fluffy and light. The third kind of plant that spoils food is called bacteria. Bacteria are the smallest of all plants. They can be seen only with the aid of a strong microscope. Bacteria can be divided into 3 groups. These pictures show one bacteria from each group. One kind of bacteria is round. Another kind is shaped like a number of little sticks or rods. The third kind is formed into little chains, one connected with the other. It is difficult to imagine how small bacteria are. If all the people in the world were turned into bacteria, they would hardly cover this half-dollar coin. When meat and vegetables spoil and are no longer good for us to eat, when milk turns sour, bacteria are the cause. Once again, just as with molds and yeasts, some bacteria are useful. But because many bacteria are dangerous to our health, scientists study them. An easy way to grow bacteria is to press your fingers on this special jelly. There are sure to be bacteria on your fingers. Now cover the dish, put it in a warm, dark place for 2 days. See where the fingers touch the jelly? Millions of bacteria are growing there. They grow in a similar way on food and may make it poisonous. There are bacteria almost everywhere. We should wash our hands often with soap and water to get rid of as many bacteria as possible. Otherwise, some of the harmful ones may be carried into our body and cause disease. We have seen that 3 kinds of tiny plants may grow on foods and spoil them: molds, yeasts, and bacteria. Let's learn how to keep these tiny plants from spoiling food. One of the oldest ways of preserving food is drying it. Long ago, people noticed that some foods keep longer when dried in the sun. Fishermen in many parts of the world dry fish in the sun. The drier the fish, the longer it will keep. Some fish are dried and salted. The salt helps take the water out of the fish and keep it dry. Many kinds of meat keep longer when preserved with smoke. Let's explain why drying foods helps preserve them. To do this, we'll try an experiment. Here are some pea seeds. The one on the left has been planted on dry soil. The one on the right has been watered. The seed in the container with the moist soil is doing well, but the seed in the dry soil isn't growing at all. This experiment shows that a plant, even a tiny plant that spoils food, needs water to grow. One more experiment. These are 2 healthy young pea plants. We'll cool the plant on the right and heat the plant on the left. See how the plant on the left begins to wilt after the heat is turned on? And the cooled plant stops growing. We all know that plants don't grow in cold winter weather. Molds, yeasts, and bacteria are plants too. Here are the clues to 2 more ways of preserving foods, by heat and by cold. Food keeps in refrigerators because tiny plants either do not grow or grow so slowly that it will take a long time before the food spoils. Very low temperatures, like those in a freezer, kill some of the tiny plants and slow down the growth of others. It would take months, possibly years, to spoil food kept in a deep freeze of your home or in store freezers. A lot of foods are preserved by killing molds, yeasts, and bacteria with heat. Canning is one of the best ways to keep food from spoiling. The food is placed in jars or cans and cooked. Then it is sealed so that new molds, yeasts, and bacteria cannot enter. The heat kills the tiny plants that would make the food spoil. In this way, food will keep for many months without spoiling. Today, many people work in plants which preserve food by heating, drying, and freezing. Almost all the milk we drink is quickly heated to a temperature which kills any dangerous bacteria in the milk. We call this pasteurized milk. The people who pasteurize milk must be very careful to keep the milk at exactly the right temperature. Many of the foods we eat today are cooked and sealed tightly in cans at large canneries such as this one. Food in cans will keep almost indefinitely. Quick freezing is one of the newer ways of keeping foods. Meat, fruit, vegetables, even baked and cooked foods stay fit to eat for a long time when kept in a deep freeze at very low temperatures. This jar contains eggs. In this machine, eggs are dried so thoroughly that they turn into powder. As long as they are kept dry, no tiny plants can grow in them. Many foods can be dried into powder form. Here, special light rays are used to destroy the plants that spoil food. In this film, we have seen that molds, yeasts, and bacteria are plants that cause food to spoil. We have learned that these plants need food, moisture, and air to live. We have learned how to dry foods so that these tiny plants cannot grow in them. We have seen that low temperatures will kill most tiny plants. We have also discovered how to destroy molds, yeasts, and bacteria by heating foods. These are some of the ways to preserve foods. There are many others. We will have more and better food as scientists find new ways to keep foods from spoiling.